Hello, sleepy dreamer. How you doing? Tonight I'll be your guide, here to ease you into calm, restful sleep. Before we get started, remember to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss future scary bedtime stories. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Also, let me know if there's a story you'd love to hear next. I didn't end up in Brook Haven by choice. It was the sort of town you sped past, not somewhere you stayed. The gas station had a single pump and shut down before dark. But when I got laid off from the heating and cooling company where I'd spent nearly 7 years, I didn't have many options. My city lease was far too pricey to keep, and this place was the only location where my modest savings could carry me beyond a few weeks. I had a distant cousin named Eric who lived nearby. We weren't particularly close, but when I called to ask if he knew of any cheap places to rent, he told me about a basement flat beneath an old insurance office. Technically not legal housing, no proper exit, limited heat, but it was $380 a month with a mattress and a mini fridge included. I signed on. The first few weeks felt like I was drifting. No direction, no connections, no drive. I filled out dozens of online applications, hardly any replied. One afternoon I wandered into the Pine Hollow Inn just off Route 45. It sat at the edge of town between a decaying diner and a mechanic's yard that hadn't seen a vehicle in ages. Its neon sign flickered in broken intervals, half the bulbs burned out. A handwritten notice taped to the door read, "Night clerk needed." The owner, a wiry man in his 50s named Carl Jensen, hired me immediately. Likely just relieved someone had answered the ad. The inn had 15 rooms, single story, laid out like a strip mall. The front office was a glass-walled booth attached to a small lounge with a coffee pot and a half-dead soda machine. Carl gave me 2 days shadowing a grizzled smoker named Larry, who mumbled more than he talked before tossing me the desk keys with little more than a shrug. "Nothing happens here. Just keep awake, track the books, and don't let guests wreck the place," Carl said. "Not many locals, just road traffic." And with that, my first solo shift began. It was mid-March. Windy, cold, and the lot was half filled by 10 that night. Most were traveling drivers who spoke barely a sentence before locking themselves away. I recall one woman clearly. She came in close to 10:45, early 40s, exhausted, wrapped in a dark green parka as if it were armor. Her eyes were swollen, and she kept darting glances toward the highway like someone might follow her in. "Need a room?" I asked. "Yes, please," she replied quickly, fumbling in her bag without looking at me. "Just one night? Cash. Tonight." I nodded and handed her the key to room 12. She walked fast down the row, pausing before unlocking her door, glancing back again, then slipping inside and drawing the curtain tight. I didn't dwell on it. Travelers get jumpy. It's normal. The quiet afterward pressed too heavily, the kind where even the vending machine's buzz seems louder than it should. Around 1:20 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. I hadn't heard any car. A man stood there, late 30s, plain jeans, flannel shirt, hair unkempt. His eyes were glazed and he kept looking past me. "Looking for a room?" I asked. "You got vacancies?" His voice was flat. "Yeah, $50. Want one?" He didn't answer immediately, just kept glancing behind me, obvious, uneasy. Finally he muttered, "No, forget it," and left. The bell rang again. I waited to see a car pull away. Nothing. I opened the office door, the cold wind bit at me. Silent lot, no one there. I stepped outside, peered around the corner. Empty. I went back inside, convincing myself he must have been walking, or high, or maybe I was reading too much into it. About half an hour later, the desk phone rang. I jumped. No one had called all night. "Front desk," I answered. A shaken female voice whispered, "There's a man outside my room. Please, he won't leave." My pulse spiked. "Which room?" 12. Grabbing the flashlight, I hurried down the walkway. From halfway, I could already tell the figure was gone. The curtain of room 12 was slightly parted, a pale face peeking out. The door opened a crack. The woman from earlier stood there, tense, clutching her phone. "Did you see him?" she asked. "No, he's gone." "Did he say anything?" She shook her head, just stared. I told him to leave, he wouldn't. "Do you know him?" I asked. "No," she replied too quickly. I asked for details. She described the same man in flannel. "Do you want me to call the police?" I offered. "No, it's fine. I'll leave early. Just if you see him, tell him to go." She closed the door before I could finish saying more. I couldn't let it go. Why deny knowing him? She was clearly terrified. And the man, he hadn't driven up, hadn't checked in. Where had he come from? I paced the office, rechecked the locks, replayed every detail. That's when I noticed the key rack looked wrong. Each room had an old plastic tag etched with the number. Room 12's key was gone, as expected, and the others in use were gone too. But room 6, still listed as vacant, was missing as well. My stomach knotted. I double-checked the logbook, no record of a check-in, but the key was gone. I called Carl. 4 rings, voicemail. I muttered curses, considering calling the sheriff myself. Then crash. Another. Then a muffled scream. From room 12. I grabbed the wooden bat Carl kept behind the desk. Mostly decorative, but better than nothing, and sprinted outside. Room 12's door was flung open. Inside, the woman was pressed into a corner, trembling, while between her and the exit stood the man. His voice was low, words unclear. I shouted without thinking. His head snapped toward me, face twisted with fury, eyes red. He lunged. I swung the bat wildly, bracing, but he didn't hit me. Instead, he tore past, sprinting full speed across the lot, through the ditch and into the woods across the road. I stood there stunned before rushing back to the woman. She was crying, her lips split, but alive. "I'm calling the cops," I told her. She didn't object. Deputies arrived within 10 minutes. We both gave statements. At last, she admitted the truth. The man's name was Daniel, her ex-husband. She had filed a restraining order months back, after a violent incident in Ohio. He'd broken it before, tracking her down multiple times. That night, she had been heading to her sister's place several states away, stopping only to rest. She hadn't thought he'd pursue her this far. She didn't want police involvement unless it was unavoidable. He must have been watching from the trees, waiting for me to step away, then stole the spare key. They searched the woods, issued alerts, filed a report, but he vanished without trace. I stayed at that inn 4 more months. I can't say why I didn't quit. Maybe I wanted to prove something. Maybe I had no better option. But after that night, everything felt different. Every noise made me flinch. Every guest who avoided eye contact put me on edge. I checked the keys 10 times each shift. Eventually, I landed a tech job back in the city. Packed up and left Brook Haven for good. Carl still mails me a Christmas card every year. Always signs it, "Hope it's quieter where you are." But I often think back to that night, about how close things came, how 5 more minutes could have changed it all, or what would have happened if he hadn't fled. And the truth is, I still don't know why he ran. Maybe some small part of him knew a line was crossed. Or maybe he just loved the chase. I hadn't planned on driving so late. The night before, I had stayed alone at a secluded farmhouse in rural Wales, in the quiet stretch near Powys. The place belonged to the family of an old college mate who suggested it as a peaceful hideaway after I lost my position in Cardiff. I had worked as a junior architect, spending endless nights on projects for a firm that eventually folded due to mismanagement. When the layoff struck, it unraveled everything: my sense of purpose, my habits, even my relationship. So when Marcus offered me his family's farmhouse, I accepted without hesitation. The farmhouse sat in the middle of rolling hills, swathes of open moorland, and endless sheep-dotted fields with no one nearby. No cars, no traffic, no sound but the shifting wind. It was the stillness I thought I needed, yet I barely slept there. That night, the old building groaned and shifted. Pipes rattled despite no taps running, and around 3 a.m., I swore I heard deliberate footsteps overhead, though the second floor had been sealed for decades. I blamed it on nerves, on the unease of being alone, but it clung to me. So the next evening I packed my things early and left. My plan was to head south, stop somewhere on the way, and finish the trip in the morning. Another restless night wasn't worth it. The fading sun stretched golden rays across the hills as I drove. My battered Vauxhall Astra hummed softly down the country lanes, a sound that almost calmed me. Villages passed by with thatched roofs and shuttered pubs, their windows lifeless. The scenery turned haunting once the sun dipped below the horizon, mile after mile of hedgerows and fields swallowed in mist. By 10:30, I was still an hour from the nearest town. The roads grew narrower, lined with sharp turns and wild overgrowth. My phone was dead for signal. My eyes kept drooping. That's when I noticed it, a dim glow ahead, faint through the fog. Drawing closer, it sharpened into a battered sign propped beside an old stone wall, lit by a flickering bulb. Ravenshallow Inn. Vacancies. There was nothing else for miles. I pulled in. Gravel crunched beneath my tires as I rolled into the empty car park. The structure stretched long and low, a single story of stonework that looked Victorian, maybe even older. Ivy gripped the walls, and wooden window frames rotted around glass panes, The shutters were stripped of paint, and part of the foundation seemed to sag where the earth had shifted beneath it. No cars, no sound, only the buzzing vacancy sign. I lingered in the car, debating whether to keep going, but my vision blurred. My body begged for rest. One night, I told myself. I climbed out into the damp August air, colder than it should have been. A faint smell of smoke drifted by, though no chimney released it. The reception was a small annex. Its wooden door moaned as I pushed it open. Inside, a single bulb flickered yellow light across the cramped lobby. It reeked of mildew and damp timber, heavy in my nose. Behind the counter sat an elderly man, perhaps in his 70s. Thin, pale. His watery eyes seemed fixed through me, not at me. "Evening," I said carefully. He gave a slow nod. "One night?" "Yes, just one, passing through." He didn't ask for documents, didn't ask for payment first, just slid a brass key across the counter, dull and tarnished. "Room 4, far end." I paused. "Anyone else staying here?" He said nothing. I picked up the key and turned away. The corridor was narrow, darker than it should have been, though bulbs lined the ceiling. The wallpaper, once patterned with golden vines, had dulled to lifeless brown. I passed rooms 1, 2, and 3, all shut, all silent. Room 4 was the last door on the left. The door resisted before groaning open. The room smelled not filthy but stale, like forgotten dust and sealed windows. A narrow bed with a faded floral quilt sat against the wall. A warped dresser with a cloudy mirror stood opposite, and a single lamp flickered weakly when I lit it. The wallpaper peeled in one corner. The floor sagged faintly under the carpet. Still, it was quiet. I placed my bag down, sat on the bed, and tried to ease the sense that clung to me. Perhaps it was leftover nerves from the farmhouse. I told myself one solid sleep would clear it all away, but I couldn't settle. Something about the space pressed against me, wrong in a way words couldn't hold. I checked the wardrobe, empty. Looked beneath the bed, only dust. Yet the feeling stayed, heavy and watching. I left the lamp on and lay down fully dressed, deciding to rest only until dawn. Around 1 in the morning, I heard it, the faint slide of fabric against the floor. My body went rigid. The room was dim but visible in the weak lamp glow. My gaze fixed to the corner at the foot of the bed. Something crouched there. At first it seemed like a shadow, but it was too solid, too heavy. The shape of someone hunched toward the wall. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I begged myself to believe it was a trick of light. But then it shifted. The figure didn't stand or crawl. Its torso rotated slowly, like a puppet tugged without strings, and where its face should have been, there was nothing. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth blank flesh, like wet clay. My body locked, terror freezing me in place. The lamp flickered again. The figure drifted forward, hovering inches from the floor, steady and silent. Panic jolted me awake. I grabbed my bag, lunged for the door, and tore it open. I never once looked back. I sprinted through the corridor, past the dead lobby, and flung myself into my car. The inn stood silent behind me as I fumbled with the ignition. The engine stuttered, then caught. Gravel sprayed as I fled the grounds and sped into the night. I didn't slow for nearly 2 hours until I reached a 24-hour station outside Gloucester. Parking beneath the harsh floodlights, I sat shaking, gasping, replaying every second. I could lie to myself, blame fatigue, tricks of shadow, my mind unraveling, but the truth was louder. I hadn't imagined that form. I hadn't imagined its faceless head or its impossible movements. What I'll never forget is the suffocating weight of that room, the way silence felt like it was burying me alive. I've never been able to stay in a roadside motel since, not because I fear it will return, but because I dread the opposite, that it won't, and that somewhere, in another dark room, it still waits. I hadn't been sleeping much in the weeks before that trip. My thoughts were cluttered with too many things I couldn't shake. My name is Jordan Hall, and at that time I was 29 years old, stuck in a monotonous job as a freelance field technician for small communication systems. Whenever a rural tower or relay went down in some forgotten corner, people like me were dispatched to repair it. That particular week, I was assigned to a coastal town called Brook Haven, a 4.5-hour drive south of my place in eastern Pennsylvania. I didn't want to set out at dawn and get caught in traffic, so after finishing a long Monday shift, I packed a quick bag and left around 6:30 in the evening. My plan was simple: drive late, crash somewhere cheap, and arrive at the site first thing in the morning. I'd made these kinds of trips plenty of times. You learn to expect odd roadside motels, strange towns, empty stretches of road. Eventually you stop believing online reviews and start relying on instinct. That's what makes this so difficult to explain, because that night my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I dismissed it. I found the place on a local rental site I occasionally used. A man named Mark Rar listed a small private guest house inside a gated neighborhood, just outside a little Delaware town called Darrell Ridge, not far from Route 9. $50, private lockbox. The photos showed something a bit outdated but tidy and comfortable. I messaged him to confirm it was available. He replied within 10 minutes, but the conversation felt strange. His writing was vague, fragmented, missing punctuation. When I asked who would leave the key, he answered that his father dropped it earlier. I pressed for details, and he wrote, "Yeah, just the door box under number you get in fine." That alone should have made me turn around, but fatigue won. It was around 11:15 p.m. when I exited the silent highway into the woods surrounding Darrell Ridge. The place barely qualified as a town, no open shops, no glowing signs, just houses drowned in silence, giving off the sense that outsiders didn't belong. My GPS guided me into a small gated cul-de-sac, maybe 20 houses total. Almost all sat dark. No street lamps, only the sweep of my headlights and the dull hum of my car. His address was number 14, a gray cottage with ivy climbing over its sides and a splintered wooden door. The driveway was empty. I grabbed my duffel and backpack, walked up to the keypad, punched in the code and heard the loudest click I'd ever heard. It echoed through the trees. I stepped inside and instantly felt out of place. The air wasn't filthy, but it carried the stillness of somewhere long sealed. And the plants, he hadn't exaggerated. The kitchen counters and walls overflowed with greenery, sprawling vines, palms, orchids, even a rubber fig. The smell was thick, damp soil mixed with stagnant water. "What the hell, a greenhouse?" I muttered. I tossed my bag onto a faded recliner in the small living room. The mismatched furniture looked sun-bleached and decades old. In the corner, a tiny square television sat on a stand. No remote, no wires, like a staged prop. I decided to check the bedrooms. The first held only a twin mattress on the floor with no frame or bedding, and on the windowsill 3 porcelain dolls from the 1950s stared out with cloudy glass eyes. I shut the door quickly. The second room was no comfort either. The walls were completely covered with wooden nutcracker figurines, many broken or crudely painted. A single sheet lay on the bed, no pillows, and the light switch controlled nothing. "Forget it," I whispered. I'd stay in the living room. I drove 10 minutes to a 24-hour store called Evergreen Market and grabbed frozen pizza rolls and iced tea. On the way out, I had the urge to check my GoPro footage. Ever since being robbed once in Virginia, I had the habit of setting it up whenever I stayed in rentals. I'd left it recording on the TV stand. Back inside, the house looked exactly the same, but I pulled the card and loaded it anyway. Nothing moved, yet something about the stillness unnerved me, as if the footage dared me to look harder. It was close to 1 a.m. when I stretched out on the couch. I kept the lights on, partly because the darkness in that place felt wrong and partly because I had no cell service since arriving. The isolation digging deeper as the night grew heavier. My phone charged in the kitchen, since the living room outlet didn't work. I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt watched from the hallway. Creaks echoed faintly, enough to keep me tense. Eventually, I went to the bathroom, its neon yellow light glaring against cracked tiles. No curtain, no clean surfaces, just a half-melted soap bar that looked untouched for months. While sitting there distracting myself by reading a shampoo bottle, I heard it, the shriek of wood scraping across the floor. A chair dragged across hardwood. It was unmistakably the chair I'd seen by the small kitchen table. Then another long screech, slower, like someone easing into it, followed by tapping, measured, deliberate finger drumming. Tap, tap, tap. My body nodded as the rhythm accelerated into frantic tapping before halting into absolute silence. The air was so still I could hear my pulse thundering. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. I pulled up my pants and convinced myself whoever was there already knew of me, so I ran. I darted from the bathroom, grabbed my backpack, and yanked out the Bowie knife I always traveled with. The kitchen was empty, the chair unmoved, tucked neatly beneath the table. The air pressed down on me like a weight. Trembling, I backed away, shoved my gear together, and bolted outside without turning off lights or checking the bedrooms. I drove an hour along deserted back roads before reaching Dunley, where I stumbled into a Holiday Inn Express at 3 a.m. The night clerk looked at me strangely. "You good?" he asked, noticing how pale I looked. "I just need a room," I answered weakly. He checked me in, gave me a king suite not even cleaned yet but with a made bed. I thanked him repeatedly and promised to leave early. Sleep never came. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the sounds. Who dragged that chair? Who tapped on that table? The GoPro footage remains with me. No movement, no audio, just silence. But I know what I heard. I know what followed me in that place. I never returned to Darrell Ridge, and I never again booked a guest house without a staffed front desk. I worked the overnight shift at a motel just outside Ashford. What unfolded one November night still lingers with me. By the time dawn arrived, I was no longer the same person who clocked in at dusk. I hadn't expected to find myself working graveyard hours at a roadside inn in a nearly forgotten town near Ashford. Yet life often veers where you least plan. After leaving university midway through my second year, something I still can't discuss without that constriction in my throat, I drifted aimlessly. I tried everything from stacking boxes in a warehouse to walking dogs. For a brief stretch, I even peddled used books out of the trunk of my car. None of it lasted. By 2022, I wound up in Milford, a small settlement 30 minutes west of Ashford. I rented a cheap room above a bakery and accepted a job I didn't think much of, night clerk at the Hollow Pines Inn. 2 stories high with a faded blue sign. It had 6 rooms upstairs and 4 tucked around back. No amenities, no charm, just bare functionality. The pay was £11.50 an hour and came with quiet, which I thought I wanted. Most nights dragged on without incident. I sat behind the battered oak desk, paperback in hand, with only the dim desk lamp casting light. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew and disinfectant. The vending machine by the stairs gave out groans every few minutes, like sighs of exhaustion. Guests came and went, weary salesmen, couples avoiding questions, long-haul drivers looking for a few hours' rest. I stayed out of the way, letting time crawl. But that November night, cold, wet, and unnervingly quiet, stripped something from me I never regained. It began unremarkably. Rain had poured since late afternoon, turning the parking lot into a reflective pool of orange lamps and jagged shadows. I made a weak instant coffee and was halfway through a frayed mystery novel when the bell above the entrance rattled. I glanced up. The man who stepped inside wasn't wet, which unsettled me. The downpour was relentless outside, yet his long gray coat was bone dry. His boots, though, carried thick clumps of mud, leaving brown stains across the tile. "Evening," I said, nodding. He didn't respond, only fixed his eyes on me. His hair clung in matted strands, and a twitch worked beneath his left eye, unbidden. The hollows under his eyes looked carved from years. Not a single restless night. "Need a room?" I asked, glancing at the register. After a pause, he nodded once. "Cash," he muttered, producing a folded wad of notes. Only room 7 was free. I slid him the key. He scrawled the name Martin Hale on the form, his hand shaking. His signature was a jagged blur. I watched him shuffle down the hall, moving like someone unused to shelter. Homeless maybe, or drifting. Not my business. People had stories and I'd long stopped asking. The next hour crawled by. I washed glasses left by the day staff, refilled soap in the lobby washroom, then settled back in. Around midnight, drowsiness overtook me. The static of the old radio hummed me toward sleep until a noise cut through. A heavy thud, then what sounded like a drawer being yanked open and slammed shut. My head snapped up. Another thud, then dragging, as if something heavy scraped across a floor. Room 7. I rose and crept down the hallway, the old carpet swallowing my steps. I paused outside, listening. Silence. I knocked lightly. "Sir? Everything all right?" Nothing. After a wait, I turned back, dismissing it as someone shifting furniture. Guests did odd things in motels. I'd barely sat again when a violent crash shook the corridor. I bolted up just as room 7's door flung open. Martin stood there, eyes wide, mouth twisted into something not a snarl, not a scream, but caught between. He stared at me like I wasn't real, like I was some figure from a fever. Then, without a word, he sprinted past me into room 9. That room hadn't been occupied in days. I followed cautiously. "Sir, you can't be in there." Inside, he ripped the bedding apart like a man possessed, tearing sheets, flinging pillows, muttering words that made no sense. "Whatever you're looking for, it isn't here," I said carefully. He didn't hear or didn't care. I reached for my phone, only to remember I'd left it at the desk. I turned to fetch it, but froze when I saw Daniel at the doorway. Daniel wasn't official motel staff. but he worked private security at a property nearby and often dropped in late at night for tea or talk. Broad-shouldered, calm, the kind of presence you couldn't ignore. He took in the scene. "You all right?" he asked low. I nodded uncertainly. "I think he's on something, or just not well." Daniel stepped forward, palms visible. "Hey friend, let's settle down. Nobody's here to hurt you." Martin spun and lunged. The crash of their struggle filled the room, fists against drywall, glass shattering, the groan of a collapsing bed frame. "Call the police," Daniel shouted, straining to hold him down. I dashed for the desk, grabbed the phone and dialed 999 with shaking hands. The dispatcher's steady voice cut through my panic as I spilled out the address in fragments of description while the chaos echoed down the hall. By the time blue lights filled the rain-slicked lot, Daniel had Martin pinned. One arm twisted behind him, blood on his lip, but eyes steady. The officers swarmed in, quick and precise. Martin thrashed, screamed, bit, but they managed the cuffs and dragged him out. Through the cruiser's rain-streaked window, his face turned toward me. The fury was gone, only pleading remained. The rest blurred. Statements, questions. 2 guests came down worried, asking if the motel was safe. I assured them, though even I didn't believe my words. A young officer, nervous yet kind, told me Martin had priors, unstable, erratic, once briefly institutionalized, no family. They suspected meth, maybe schizophrenia, maybe both. I stayed until Ruth, the morning clerk, arrived past 6. She took one look at me, said nothing, just placed a mug of hot tea in front of me and assumed the desk. I walked home under the dim gray morning, the rain thinning to mist that clung like sweat. I didn't sleep. My mind replayed his urgency, his breaking into room 9, the one he wasn't assigned. Why that one? I worked at Hollow Pines for another 5 months before leaving for a delivery job, vowing never to work another night shift. Yet even now, when I pass decaying buildings or empty inns, I think of him, what he was so desperately searching for, and whether he ever found it, at least in his own fractured way. It isn't the screams or the fight that stays with me. It's that last look through the window, his eyes reflecting something achingly familiar. Exhaustion, loss, and the desperate hope that the world still held meaning no one else could see. I was 13 the summer. Everything shifted, not in some dramatic, catastrophic way. There were no deaths, no disasters, but in that subtle, suffocating sense where something inside you tilts forever, leaving things just slightly off balance. My name's Colin. I grew up in a small town in southern Wisconsin. Endless flat farmland, quiet evenings, and the kind of community where neighbors still left their doors unlocked. We didn't have much, but we had what we needed. My mom worked at the town's drugstore and kept books for a few businesses on the side. My dad wasn't around. He'd left when I was 6. So it was me, my mom, and my little brother Lucas, who was 6 that summer. We went to visit my mom's cousin in St. Louis. Though instead of staying at her house, we checked into a roadside motel. Mom said she didn't want to intrude. Honestly, I think she just liked having her own space, a room where she could lock the door. The motel was nothing special. 2 floors, a vending machine that rarely worked, and a pool that reeked more of chemicals than chlorine. But it was cheap, clean enough, and not far from my mom's cousin. We were given room 109, tucked around the back on the ground floor, a short walk from the pool. The day we arrived, the sky hung heavy with that gray tone that hints at rain but never follows through. While Mom went to the desk for our keys, I was stuck watching Lucas. We sat on one of those splintered benches outside the office. Lucas poked ants with a straw, while I scrolled on my cracked phone, sweating through my shirt. That's when he appeared. The man, ordinary. That's the only word I can use. Average height, average build, short brown hair, tan slacks, gray polo. He could have been 40, maybe 50. He looked like the sort of person you'd forget instantly. Only I didn't forget him, because he didn't approach the counter. Instead, he came in, sat directly across from us, and stared. He didn't speak, didn't move much, just sat. But it felt wrong. When Mom came back waving the key cards, she called us over. I grabbed Lucas's hand and followed quickly without saying a word about the man. Later that evening, after a long visit with relatives, we returned around 7. Lucas had been pestering Mom all day about swimming, so she finally relented. We changed into our suits, grabbed towels and headed to the pool. For a while it felt normal. Empty water, echoing splashes, the warm smell of bleach. Then he came back. Same man. This time he stood outside the gate, leaning on the fence, arms crossed, still in the same clothes. No swimsuit, no towel, just watching. I froze halfway through a lap. Mom noticed too. Her eyes narrowed, and she gave me a tiny nod like, I see him as well. After a few minutes, she leaned close and whispered, if he's not gone in 5 minutes, we're leaving. 5 minutes passed. He stayed. We gathered our things and left without looking back. The air felt heavy, almost pressing against us. Back in the room, Lucas curled up with his tablet while Mom put on some cartoon to distract him. I pretended to watch but kept flicking glances at the door, the window, the strip of darkness beneath the curtains. Mom got up after a while, saying she needed a shower. She looked uneasy but didn't comment. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. 2 short taps. Then a voice. Housekeeping. I frowned. It was after 9. Why would staff come so late? Lucas didn't look up. I hesitated, then slowly cracked the door. I wish I hadn't. It was him, the man. Up close, I noticed a scar beneath his left eye. He smiled. A slow, unsettling smile. His hands were behind his back. Then he lifted one in a small wave. How was your swim? My body locked. My throat felt like it was packed with gravel. I couldn't move. At that moment, the bathroom door creaked open. Steam rolled out and Mom stepped into the room in a towel, drying her hair. Her eyes darted to the doorway, to him, and without flinching, she dropped the towel, grabbed me by the arm and slammed the door shut in one swift motion. The deadbolt clicked, the chain slid into place. She didn't ask questions. She went straight to the phone and dialed the front desk. Her voice was steady but tight, like a wire pulled too hard. Room 109. There's a man pretending to be staff. He followed us earlier, and now he's outside our door. Not a guest, not in uniform. He knows my kids were at the pool. We need another room. No police. I begged her, but she said we'll move first. We were relocated upstairs. Room 209, overlooking the parking lot. New locks, new angle. We never saw him again that night or the next. Still, I didn't sleep. 2 days later, the desk clerk told Mom they reviewed footage but couldn't confirm if the man was staying there. They said they'd keep staff watching the lot at night. That didn't reassure us. We cut the trip short and left early. Mom stayed quiet on the drive home. Lucas was too young to grasp why the vacation ended. But I knew. I still see that man sometimes. Not in dreams, but in crowds. On buses and gas stations. For a moment, I'll think it's him. Then I blink and it's gone. What haunted me wasn't only that he watched us. It was that he had a plan. He tracked us from the lobby, to the pool, to our room. He timed his knock for when Mom was in the shower. People don't like stories like this. There's no neat ending. No arrest, no headline. Just fear lodged deep, clinging like a burr to your spine. I'll never know what would have happened if I hadn't opened the door. But I think about it often. I think about room 109. About how evil doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes it simply knocks, smiles and asks, how was your swim? We never went back to St. Louis. The years rolled on. School, sports, awkward teenage phases, first jobs. Lucas barely remembers it. He believes we left early because Mom was sick. I never corrected him. Some truths feel safer buried. Once, years later, I asked Mom if she remembered that man. We were sitting on the porch after dinner. She lit a cigarette, stared into the night, and finally said, "You never open a door unless you know who's there." That was it. I didn't press. She died 3 years ago. Quick, sudden heart attack. At the funeral, everyone said how strong she was, how lucky we were. I nodded, but the memory I held was that night. Her speed, her decisiveness, no hesitation, no panic. I don't know what she saw in him, something I hadn't. Or maybe she had seen it years before in someone else. Now I'm older than she was back then. I have a son of my own, about the same age Lucas was, and sometimes late at night, when there's an unexpected knock, my heart falters for a moment, long enough for that old fear to return. I always check the peephole, always. Most times it's nothing. Delivery, wrong address, a kid selling candy. But sometimes there's no one at all, just 2 quick knocks. Silence. I double lock the door and think about room 109. Because the most unsettling stories don't always end. Some linger, waiting just outside,